All right, awesome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Measuring Dev Skills with CodeSignal.
Hello,
Um,
everyone.
I believe Pat and I today are talking about Postgres. Is that right, Pat?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So here we are again in CodeSignal's paired programming software. Basically, just to remind everyone or to introduce it for anyone who's unfamiliar, we've got our IDE window over here. We've got our console at the bottom, which is going to show us like our test data and stuff. And we've got, or soon we will have our description for the problem we're going to attempt on the left side over here. So speaking of which, we might as well go ahead and select that task. It's this one today, user statistics. So we'll confirm that. And as you said, this is a PostgreSQL question, so it is going to be a database question. If you tuned in last week, or even if you didn't, last week we covered our first database question. It was a relational database one. It was about MySQL. But yeah, today we're going to be focused on PostgreSQL.
Yep. And for anyone who hasn't watched the previous episodes, we talked about that the main power of this you know, IDE is that it has automated testing baked into it, which enables you to do like a live interview without worrying about running the test in your head, like kind of we're simulating right now with Pat, but also you can do it as part of a test, which means you don't even have to be there. You could send it to somebody else, they can complete it, and the results would get auto-graded, which I think we will experiment with as we start writing the query here.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, yeah, not everyone has the time, or you won't be able to necessarily screen like hundreds of candidates in person. So it's nice that we have this kind of automation. So I just want to
Yep.
run the test to give us some an idea of what we're working with here. So the main difference between this and the last one that we're working on, I mean, aside from the fact that it's Postgres, aside from MySQL, is the fact that we have now two tables over here. So we're looking at some user data. The users have an ID and a city over here. But then we also have this table of cities that kind of shows us which country each city is in. And what's asking for is for us to give something like this, where we have the IDs of all of our users in one column and then just the country that they're from over here. So we're going to have to put these two tables together in this case in order to give them what they're looking for here. So no problem, we can do that. As you can see, we can both type in this thing, which is a nice thing if we're dealing with like an interview situation. So we're going to start by just sort of selecting everything from both of these things. So we're going to select everything from our users, I think it was called, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then we're going to join these together. You can kind of think of this as a situation where like the city here represents the foreign key
Mm-hmm.
of the city's table over here, right? So we're going to
Mm-hmm.
say users and then left join cities
Mm-hmm.
on, and we want a situation where basically the users dot city is equal to the cities dot city. All right, so we'll try that and we'll see what we get from this. Hopefully this should match up the data in the right way. And it looks like it did, but we sort of have two issues here. The first being that we have too much information, right? We've got 4 columns, we only need 2 of them. And the second is that there's this unknown thing, which we're just returning a blank for, or like a null sort of thing, right? So the first one I mentioned I think is easy. We just need to select ID and country. And we could probably be more specific about this, like users.id or cities.country. Maybe it would be a good idea to be specific, but it looks like this is going to work for us. So we've got ID and country. The only thing left to do is basically, instead of just country, we need to make it unknown if it doesn't have anything. So we'll use the coalesce function, which is basically going to return the first thing that's not null, as far as I understand. So country, if it has country, it'll return country. Otherwise, let's just return the string unknown. So we'll try this, and hopefully this is at least closer to what we're looking for. But
What
sorry,
what
go ahead.
happens right away when you click that run button? It takes a couple of seconds. I'm curious what's going on under the hood there.
Such a great question. So basically, what this is doing is As we talked about in some of the previous videos, it's taking this information that we have over here and it's sending it to a dedicated server called a code runner. We've got a few code runners running in parallel at all times, and each of those has a Docker image on it that basically equips it for whatever type of task it needs to evaluate. So for example, in this case, since it's Postgres, it would open up a Docker container with some metadata dealing with like what type of task it is. And then it's also going to send like the particular code as well as the test data over here, so that it sets up basically a container for each of these things, loads up all this data just using like SQL commands. And then it runs our script. It takes what it gets from that, it returns it as a CSV to the CodeSignal server, and then it makes the comparison between the output that we got versus the expected output in order to evaluate it. And it also displays it really nicely, which, as we talked about last time, is kind of a nice feature, because with databases especially, I mean, like it's tough to know what you're looking at, right? Just getting it to a point where we can actually visualize this stuff can be a really non-trivial thing. So it's nice that we can sort of zoom in on just this part involving building out the queries. Sorry, does that...
Yeah, I was just saying, sounds like a lot of stuff. I'm surprised it only takes a couple of seconds to get the results back.
Well, and yeah, that's a great point. That's one of the advantages of Docker, right? Because it doesn't need to like set up the whole server each time. Right. It can basically just give us a nice little container, which is quick and easy. It can kill the process easily without messing up the server or anything like that. So yeah, that is definitely a big advantage. So I think there's just one thing we have left to do over here, which is to say as country, because right now it's returning what we want. It's giving us the unknown thing, but it's saying coalesce over there because it says that over here. So if we do this, I think we should probably have it. And I guess another thing to say is there's another advantage if we're trying to like auto-evaluate a candidate, right? Like without someone to watch over them, without someone watching. It's not just telling us like, yeah, they did it or they didn't. Like we get some detailed information about how many tests are you passing. And so depending on how the task is structured, that can give some really nice, meaningful information about like where their strengths may lie.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I don't know how obvious it is, because I think the people watching are seeing it from your side. In this case, you're the interviewer. I think candidates don't actually see all of the test cases. So you usually see half of the test cases and you don't see the other half, which is configurable. But the idea is that you don't want the candidates to just be coding to the requirements, that you just putting there like if and else solutions or something like that. You want them to really just use the sample test cases to help them understand the input and the output and check for like sample examples, but you really want them to think on their own, what are some of the corner cases or the things that I'm missing to complete the solution.
Right. And I mean, like it would be probably pretty obvious if someone was just hard coding all the answers, but I mean, it's nice this way that it's not going to introduce any of that kind of noise into the data. But
that's in an interview though, right? But I guess in a lot of cases, when this is used in a test, an engineer never looks at it, right? So like as a recruiter, I just send it and I get a score, and I want to trust that score instead of having to look at the code and understand what is it that they did to evaluate whether it's right or wrong. So I think in those cases, it still comes in handy.
Oh, absolutely.
One quick question for you. I mean, I'm completely ignorant when it comes to Postgres, but I know MySQL reasonably well, and this looks almost like MySQL code. Is there, what's kind of the difference between two? Because I'm sure there are many differences.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are a lot of differences that I won't even be able to touch on. But as far as I understand, I think there's more of a focus on extensibility for Postgres. I think that it focuses a little more on compliance, like with the ACID standard, the SQL standard. And I think that it can accept no SQL data types as well, which I don't think there's like full support for anyway in MySQL. So I think those are some of the main differences anyway. Oh, and it's open source and not owned by Oracle, so I think, yeah.
Which is an important difference.
Right. All right, so anything else we should talk about while we're here? Or?
I think that sums it up nicely. Unless you have anything else, we can quickly touch on what we're going to talk about next week and wrap it up.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be away next week, but for the one after that, anyway, we can, I think we'll be focusing on NoSQL. So speaking of which, right? I believe we're going to try to find a Mongo question for that, and more database stuff basically.
Cool. And that should probably be our last episode on databases. From there, we'll move on to something exciting again.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you probably not next week, but the week after.
Sounds good. See everyone then.
Bye.